All right. We are joined by a new great friend of mine. His name is Coleman Antonucci. He's one of the founders of World Forge Games. Coleman, it is a genuine pleasure to have you on here. I just want to say welcome, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you here today.
Same. I'm really happy to be a part of this. I love the StoryTogether concept and everything, and I appreciate being able to have talked with you. I really enjoyed our little friendship. I was thinking about that earlier today, about how just serendipitous this all has been. That is just like, oh, just one little like, and now here we are, man. It's pretty cool.
Actually, to give you credit, it was like a dozen likes. I'm like, hey, this World Forge guy, what a guy, what a supporter. It was very generous of you, Coleman. I appreciate it. And you the inertia was really all yours. The momentum, rather.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. I've always wanted to support anyone, and we've been doing this World Forge for a long time, and we, like many things, we haven't had a lot of support, but and in that same sense, I know what it's like of like when you don't have many followers, just one interaction that can keep you going for a little while.
Listen, and you and I have talked about this at length. It could be hard, right? Putting yourself out there. It takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of chutzpah. And, it came at a time in my life where, I was going, done.
Yeah.
We can, we'll make that call. But anyway, Coleman, again, like I said, genuine pleasure to have you here. I really wanted to kind of start off with a little bit of a banger of a question. So obviously World Forge and StoryTogether, I think, share a similar philosophy about bringing people into playing stories, right? So where did that passion, where did that desire come from? Was it a story that you played? Was it from other stories that you had read or experienced? Like, where did that really start for you?
I'm not fully sure where it started, because I do kind of, it might have come from how many people over the years were so averse to just the idea of Dungeons and Dragons. And I mean, I've never really had a typical sort of mindset. I've always kind of not understood certain things. And so when I was first shown D&D, I was in high school, and I have a really funny memory of, like, I went up to my friend a couple days later, another theater guy, and I was like, really loudly in the hallway, I was like, hey buddy, do you want to play D&D with me and my friend this weekend? And the guy I asked got so embarrassed. He was like, oh, and it hit me of like, there's this weird stigma. And then later on, I sort of started, like, the D&D is something that a lot of people, I think, not necessarily just D&D, but a lot of systems are very rules, sort of like, to be good at the system and to feel like you're good at the system, like some major systems, I feel like you have to put a lot of time into. And I saw that put a lot of people down. Like, I'd convince someone to come play, and then we'd spend the whole day making a character. And most of the day was me like, okay, well, I could read this to you, or I need you to read it, so that you know how to do the thing I said we would do now, but I didn't tell you that this was the first step. And no shade in any way to any system, but I think I just, at one point, me and the guy that were writing, have been writing this system together, one night we just wanted to play, and we didn't want to, I had just kind of gotten burned out on diving deep into the tomes of Pathfinder, which I'll say, great system, no shade. There's a lot of studying you can do, and there's just so much to read. And I again, no shade, it burned me out. And so we just had this idea of like, why don't we just make a sort of like build your own system that like everybody can kind of learn, and every character can kind of follow the same rules, so that because him and I that night we made like two easy. He made he made some character from StarCraft, and I made some like element bender from the Avatar of the Last Airbender show, and we had them like fight each other, and we both ran a little mini dungeon for each other. But what was so great is this, like, when we agreed, what I really stuck out to me is the idea of compromise. Is when we both agreed on how we would roll dice and then how each person's thing would work. We ended up having such a fun time, and it was just the two of us, and that the idea that we just kind of kept going with it, and at some point we just realized, like, yeah, this is a really good tool that we could use to get more people into our system quicker, and we've shown it to a few people now, and one of the people we showed it to had never played any system before at all, and picked it up very quickly, and even it made my heart kind of shine at moments where we'd be at the table, and it'd be like 3 or 4 sessions after we'd taught them the rules, and we'd be at the table, and they would say a term, like a very specific term, like clash number or something like that, and they'd say it without without having to think, like it just became natural to them, and it just was, it was just it's such beautiful moments of, like, because of the work that I put in, this person who had never been able to get into a tabletop system before is now having the time of her life.
Right.
It's a long answer.
Well, that's great. So let me, Coleman, that is part and parcel with you, my friend. It's all good. So let me dig into that a little bit. So you observe this need to break a stigma, right? You observed a need to go rules light, and neither of us are particularly original in that, but there's so many different ways to look at that. And so when you started to have this sort of inception point with WorldForge, and you're like, whoa, this could bring people in, what was it? Was it that the moment where you're like, this actually is worthy of hundreds of hours of my time and thought and passion? Like, was there sort of an inciting point? Was that it, or were there other?
Well,
was it
for sure.
A longer series? Was stories you played on it? Like, what was that for you?
For sure, that moment did hit, but that moment was probably after somewhere of like 400 to 500 hours. It really did for a long time. It was just a thing that me and my buddy just kept working on. Like we just no matter how much time we'd stop, one of us would open the document again, and we'd just start talking about it again, and I'd be like, oh, and there's a beautiful thing about, like, not thinking about something and letting your subconscious mind sort of stew on it. Right. And it'd be like 2 months, and my buddy would, like, I'd see an email, and I'd read what he'd written, or we'd talk about it when we were hanging out. And it just kept going, and then at some point we realized that this is something that we're gonna, like, make and publish, and that
Right.
we started this back in about 2015, and I'd say the moment of 2015 is the start. I'd say about pandemic 2017 or 18, 19, whenever that was. About the pandemic is when we realized that we could start doing, when we got to a point where we could start using those rules to actually do our own fun campaigns and our own unique and custom stuff. And then about 2 years ago, me and homie sat down and we're like, yeah, this is where we're going with this. We didn't necessarily intend it, but I think both of us had a sort of dream that it would get there, but there was this sense that was never the driving force. The driving force has always just been the ability to just get some dudes around a table, slap out some characters, and just have some fun. So
let me ask you something. So you have, I think a pretty clear philosophy and ethos with World Forge, and that ultimately comes down to getting people to play, which we've talked about. I think you just spoke about eloquently. Let me ask you something though. Let me turn that around on its face. In what way, or what ways perhaps, has that process of the creation of World Forge, but also playing stories on your system, helped you specifically in your life?
I'll tell you what. Are you ready a lot. It's the answer to that question is a lot. For real, like I was just saying a little bit ago with the one of our players using a term casually and just having it committed to memory, it just like, I come from a background where I now struggle with like feelings of self-worth, and like me and the guy that writing this, we worked on this for like 5 years, just him and I, before anybody started reading it. And then not only that, one time we went up to our buddy's house and we tried to show him the rules, and he just could not get into it. It just nope. But I'll say this, because of that, we realized that harsh criticism was something we needed to hear, because it made us go, all right, let's start writing a lot more of this down. We just have concepts and we have some stuff written down, but we really need to start, if we want to be able to show this to our friends, which kind of just was what it was. We just wanted to show it to our friends, essentially. We were just like, we got to put pen to paper, or, keyboard to Google Drive, and put some stuff down, and not just be talk. And so right there, 3 lessons of like, don't give up. Criticism isn't a bad thing. And the third one,
The journey
don't just
Coleman. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Don't criticism is good for you.
Right.
It helps you grow. And
So
because of that, we put in all that work. But yeah, you go.
And I think that's a story that folks need to hear, because one thing that I realized, I think, when I was just getting started, or I think a really important lesson for me, and I think this applied to you, and you can speak to it in a second, but when I was growing up and I was a kid, stories would just come naturally. I'd listen to music, and all of a sudden I would see these things, and then over time the world forged itself, if you don't mind the pun.
I love it.
And that was a beautiful experience for me, and it meant a lot. It still means a great deal to me. So it was a real big shock when I found out that wasn't quote-unquote normal. that wasn't something that happened to most people. For some reason, I guess I thought that was like, oh, we all go to our own story worlds, and they're all like constantly developing and iterating, and have all these sort of beautiful metaphorical nuances about what we're experiencing in life. But then when I discovered this art form, to me it was like this beautiful marriage of bringing that to life and bringing people into your story world, but also in a strange way you get to go to theirs because of how they interact with it and how they meet it halfway. And you and I have had some wonderful conversations about that. So let me ask you, talk to me about your story world, or your story worlds, and your process of bringing them to life, with World Forge, or just in general, and the satisfaction, or maybe like the absence of a type of loneliness, right? When people are actually earnestly engaging with you. Talk to me about what that fulfillment might have been like for you, especially as you were getting started, but maybe even more so now, depending on where you're at. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I before I long wind into that answer, I want to note that, yeah, I went through the same thing of other people aren't like constantly like making up stories in their head. Other people don't have trouble focusing because these stories keep playing in their head. Oh, okay. All right. I fully identify. It was one of those I'm in this picture and I don't like it moments for me.
I love it.
Right? But I remember the first campaign I did where I was was the DM. I was good old 3.5. The just one of the top three systems. There's D&D 5th Ed, Pathfinder, and then D&D 3.5. No, I'm just there's
Hey, I love all this.
no, I spent so much time on 3.5, and I had a lot of fun, and obviously I struggled as the first DM because that's what you do. No matter how good you might think you are, the first time you do DMing or whatever your system calls it, that is hard to do. So I struggled with that, but I remember I would find myself like walking down the side of the road and just fully immersing myself in this like cut scene that I had stored for like one of the specific players where like it was a player who had like shown me D&D and then I was DMing for him, and so I wanted to like do something cool, and like I was just saying, like my brain just comes up with stories, and I had this whole cool thing, and I actually did manage to pull it off. It was one of the only things I managed to do in that campaign was pull off this twist of like the BBEG was that character time traveled. Long story short, and like I legitimately got to have that reveal, and just realized of like, oh man, I can have this moment of storytelling and immersion and emotions and full on, I'll say immersion again, with someone, and it's like I made it. And then going forward from there, I DMing has been quite a struggle for me, even though I've gone to improv theater and done a bunch of like performing all my life, and it's still difficult because there's a lot you got to focus on and you got to be fluid. But when it came to the story worlds, I would lose myself for hours and hours coming up with all these different stories. And right now, we're doing in our current campaign in the World Forge, we're doing a unique story world that I came up with that we've done. This is the second campaign we've done in the world, and I kind of don't want to talk about it too much because I want to. We're kind of talking about using it, but it's just
Okay.
it's something that I came up with, and it's really unique, and I really like it, and all the players are really into it, and I really, depending on, I might talk about it one day on this one, but I wanna be a little. Because also
Just be
I'll
quiet,
get
it's fine.
lost. Yeah, I'll be lost in it. If you want to let me talk for 20 straight minutes, I'll get lost in that.
So it's a good segue, though, Coleman. Let me ask you a question. I've asked myself from time to time, if you could make some of your major ambitions for World Forge come true, what would they be?
I like that question. I would say just getting out there, and I mean truly. I truly, it would be great. It would be fantastic if we want to talk about like incredible ambition. I would love to have like a parody, or not parody, but a show or like a network on par with like Dimension 20 or Critical Role, where we use the World Forge to tell all these like actual play amazing stories with costumes and sets and all these other things that take a lot of production value we don't have yet. That's if we want to talk about lofty ambitions, that's where I'd like it to go. And I don't know, it's not necessarily unreasonable, but I know that is not something that would be easy to attain. And I mean, like, you want to talk even like maybe I definitely haven't laid awake at night thinking about like if Matt Mercer or Brennan Lee Mulligan or like Lou Wilson or Emily Ashford or like Murph or any of those from any of those shows, if any of them were to one day play my system or even acknowledge it, I don't know if I would get higher than that. And honestly, even what we're doing now is almost more than I fully expected at the beginning. And I think a reasonable, if I were to keep myself in this moment in this time now. I think I really just want the World Forge to become something that gets more people playing these games, like, and DMing and writing. Like, writing this has changed my life, but just playing tabletop and going through DMing, there's so many times where I get told something as a character that I'm playing and it hits my core, and you just you it's like you almost level up in real life when you hear stuff like that, and there's so much beautiful insight, and there's so many like amazing anecdotes that, like, I mean, I can't really tell them because anytime, even if you don't really tell D&D stories unless you get asked to, but still, and even then, you know, the context is always needed. But I have so many amazing memories and so many inside jokes with a lot of my friends. I can say one word to a buddy of mine, and it all just laughs. And I think that there's something really beautiful in the way that just being in the collective storyteller, it breaks down some walls, you know, not maybe all of them, but it definitely instills the idea of a collective.
There's no question. I think one of the best parts about it is the bond of the community that you forge, right? It's something that I've always loved. I think it's just a natural, organic part of the process. But I think you touched on another, I think, really great way of phrasing it as leveling up in real life, right? And it's really funny the way you said it. It's like no one asked you to tell D&D stories. I think we should all be talking about our D&D stories with each other.
We should.
Because it's like we need to remove it from like no one wants to talk about your fantasy football team, or I really want to hear your really cool D&D stories. We need to remove it from that, Terry. But let me ask you first before I make you tell a D&D story. Let me ask you, give me one example for the audience about a way that you personally have leveled up in real life through your playing or GMing.
One time, you know, not just one time, but it happened after one specific time. There's many times where I tried to force something on my players, and it took me a lot of times of doing it to see how it affected them, and to see how, like, you know, sometimes it was because I didn't know. Sometimes it's because I didn't fully do my research. Sometimes it was because I hadn't fully gotten the idea of DMing, and there really is no wrong answers. But it you know, I saw the way that it forced my player, I saw how that affected them, and I gained empathy and perspective and patience that I feel like I've pulled into my everyday life, like an idea of just like listening more to other people. I struggle so much with like being here and now. I really have to focus to be here and now, and DMing has really helped me do that in a way where I'm not like constantly pre-planning what I need to do. Just like, I'm here in this moment. I don't know what this other person's going to do, but I'm engaging with them. I'm paying attention to them and not sort of paying attention to the fantasy realm, which in a weird way, that's kind of almost like, that's almost not what you think would be better for DMing. You think you'd want to be able to immerse yourself more, but I got to this point where I'd immerse myself so much in the things that I had pre-planned that when my characters veered off it, I would just be like, no, because of this, you have to stay on my plan. Because I'm good at coming up with like ancillary reasons of like why you can't go that way.
Right. No, I think a big lesson for a lot of us, especially those of us where you just want the validation of someone experiencing the stories that are living in your head, rent-free, as it turns out, but for really good reasons. I think striking that balance, I think, is a really wonderful point, especially for GMs that are reaching that sort of intermediate to expert phase where they've put in the hours, they've put in the time, they've been playing a lot over the years. You know, where you draw that line in those moments, or maybe, you know, use those moments to surprise and delight. I think one of the moments that when I was writing the blog more regularly, I called it like building toward moments of awe, right? Because, but like being open to what that awe represented. So in your case, like, you know viscerally what that is. Like, you need someone to experience it, but the
Yeah.
players don't. Like, that can be more open-ended. So I think you articulated it beautifully in terms of that challenge. And I just want a brief aside, and I should have mentioned this earlier. All of those D&D tabletop like goats, like, please look at Coleman's product. Like, make his day. That's all you got to do. He just told you what it would take to make his day. So please, if there's anyone watching this, please, I beg you, like, talk to them. Say, Matt, whomever, Brennan, all these folks, like,
He said
all
it.
it's going to take to make that wonderful man's day is to read his product. So shout out to make that happen.
Ian said it. That's how it's a rule now. Somebody's got to do it. He said it. Somebody's got to do it.
And speaking of something that you said, now you got to tell us one of your favorite stories. You have to. You can't get away with not doing it.
Let me. There's so many good ones. Which is a possible one that I could pick of. I had. This is a. No, I'll go. One of the okay, so no, it's all good. It's all good. I have so many of those. I don't know how far back or how far forward to go. Okay, so here's a cool story, and this is kind of a nice like character arc that I didn't expect. So I made this character in Pathfinder that was a Gripply, which is a frog dude, and I had this like backstory of how he got excommunicated from his tribe wherever it was, and he can't really remember why, but what he does remember is like he had to make some choice that like put people in danger but saved other people or something. Like he can't remember. And I was just I have a lot of like Southern in my blood, in my heritage, so I gave him a nice Southern accent, like a nice fine sophisticated and IRL, which I told the other players are IRL in the Pathfinder world. What really happened to that frog is that he wouldn't stop talking. Like he wouldn't stop talking in this accent, and nobody else in the town did, and they didn't know why he was doing it, and they didn't really understand, so they kicked him out. And so I played this character for a really long time. We were doing the Rise of the Rune Lords campaign for Pathfinder, and had a TPK at one point. And so the new batch of players came in, and my buddy made another Gripply who didn't tell the other characters, but he told the other players, like I kind of had, that he was my character's brother who had come looking for him, and he gave his character that same Southern accent and was like, I'm just here. I'm told I was conscripted to come here and help y'all with your. And so eventually, that through all this Pathfinder stuff, and our GM added in some new stuff, we eventually find ourselves in the celestial domain that Pathfinder has, like the heaven domain. And we were on. This was during the pandemic, we were doing Roll20. So I messaged the GM in a private, and I go, "Can this character meet my old character and like reunite with his brother up in heaven?" And we did. And this is a moment where I was not expecting this, but I rolled with it, and it ended up being beautiful. Is that so? He walks up to my old character, and it's just them in this moment, and he comes up to me and he goes, John, hey. And he drops his accent, and he goes, "Hey, it's just me. You don't have to talk in that accent anymore." And I hadn't fully piece together why or what or how or who, but I just went with it, and I teased it a little bit, and then my character was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not in an accent." And he's like, "No, it's okay. You can stop." And I went, "Oh my God, my voice. Oh, why was I talking like that?" And we had just this amazing, beautiful moment where I could hear the girls in the background of the other players that I was with. I could hear their wives in the background just cackling with laughter as we were going through all this. Yeah. Okay, now you got to tell me. You got to tell me a story now. See, yeah, it's hard. If you want to take a moment to think about it.
No, I think you know what, I'll tell one that was really meaningful. So I was the GM, and I mean there's obviously a limitless amount. So picking one by
Right.
no means makes it the favorite, but I think it's very indicative. So um, during the pandemic as well, we played a 5e campaign, and
Nice.
my favorite genre is actually historical fiction. So I applied my same principles with historical fiction to Forgotten Realms, which is what I grew up with, and created
Oh,
this really,
cool.
wonderful story. And there was two brothers that were players, and one of them, he was just like evil scum. Like, to be honest, he was scum, and but he had been through so much in his life. You could kind of see like, all right, I get kind of why you're evil scum, and eventually, we meet the progenitor of all dragons, and he has to go through kind of like a dream sequence in in that sort of like celestial dragon domain, where he's like purging the aspects of himself that became evil from that
Ooh.
inception point as a child where it all began. And he
That's
saw
cool.
his father crumble into dust because of Tiamat like being trying to resurrect, because his family were all cultists, like purple ones in Tiamat's cult. And so basically like each phase of this dream sequence was purging the evil parts of him finally, and like it all culminated in the music, because we were playing musical over Roll20. And it was
Ooh,
like
nice.
he basically had to, what he realized the character is he, through music and his being able to pour his spirit into music with sort of the ancient dragon spirits in that celestial realm, as well as his like friends and family, was able to like use the music to purge his spirit, and like sort of like one final like quest. But like the music that was playing in real life over
Dope.
the game, like it perfectly synced up, and it was like this beautiful sort of like therapeutic session for the character. But it was like this dream
Nice.
like it's hard to describe, but it was beautiful, because like the artwork, their names are like Sezi and Peku, who are in my opinion the greatest map makers in the world right now. I had like
Nice.
one of their beautiful like dragon maps, and it was just beautiful, because by the end, and so he transitioned from this like neutral evil rogue, and then he became a neutral good bard who
That's
basically
awesome.
could use, he could like bardic inspiration. He could then have like extra usages of that to like hook people up. So it's like a really beautiful like
Nice.
metaphorical journey that he went on. So that sounds to me. I mean, there's again,
That's
we could,
beautiful.
trust me, we could sit here all day.
Right?
But that one I
There's
think is just
nothing
good
like a
because
good
you can see that.
there's nothing like a good redemption story. Evil to good. It just every time we hear one it just makes us all happy.
There's so many. I mean, that campaign like had both sets, but I think one of the great things is when you go through something that long. That was a 23-month process. It was 96 sessions.
Wow.
It was one of my favorite campaigns I ever did. It was just a
Good
time in my
job
life where I
on
had to carve out
DMing a
time to do
campaign
that.
for that long.
I
Sorry, I
mean,
talked over you.
honestly, I think it was the pandemic. I just had my first kid. There was a lot. I think it was just such a necessary creative outlet, because when you don't, like, for me, I'll speak personally. Maybe you're I'm sure you're similar. You kind of have to do it. Like, you need to be able to have this outlet. It's kind of part of what
Yeah.
keeps you sane, right? At the end of the day. And so
Yeah.
that campaign, it's called A Stolen Sunrise, and
Nice.
it was just beautiful. It was
Nice.
very meaningful for sure. But
No,
I
I
did want to ask
fully
you,
agree.
before. Yeah, I did want to ask
I
you. So, go ahead. Go
you
ahead.
go. I fully agree. Just with what you were saying, and I almost at this point I even forgot what you were saying. So you go now.
Did we lose you, Coleman?
No, I'm still here. I just brain farted for a second.
No, I just don't.
Oh.
I think your video got turned off.
Oh,
I'm
I'm
not seeing your
still.
video at all.
I'm still seeing my video, and you're still there too. Um,
I see. It just says your name as if you're not joined. Do you mind just
Cam.
leaving and coming back, and we'll finish
Yeah.
the sucker up?
Yeah,
I
yeah. Let me do
apologize,
that
Coleman,
again.
but it literally went blank, and I don't want it to record something blank. I apologize. Sorry about that, Coleman. There it goes. You're back. Sorry about that, Coleman.
Nice. It's all good.
So yeah, let me ask you. I wanted to. I think you raised a really interesting question about, some of those special moments and how they sit with you. Can you talk to me about a time where in your real life as Coleman, going through everything you go through in your life, which is considerable, how those moments kind of leapt from the subconscious to the conscious to help you in whatever you were experiencing at the time? Can you think of an example off the top where that might have happened to you, maybe even recently?
Yeah. I do this thing because I really struggle with I have Crohn's disease and I really struggle with mental health. I was diagnosed with ADHD, depression, anxiety, personality disorder, and it's a mess up here sometimes. But I have this thing in my head to where I imagine this like sort of cavernous sort of fantasy area, no specific size or anything, and I imagine the demons. I imagine the bad thoughts that I'm having as literal demons in there, and I imagine a paladin, like golden armor angel version of myself, just action scening the crap out of those and like casting. I'll imagine it. I'll imagine that version of me standing next to me sometimes when I'm because it's the pandemic. For one, the pandemic was really hard, and like I played weekly for the same reason that you were saying. I needed it. It wasn't just during the pandemic. It wasn't just playing, it was being with people, and that even though it was
Right.
online, it was still meeting up and talking, and Discord never worked properly. I live out in the mountains and I never had good internet, but it was still something. And so I'll imagine, I'll just imagine this paladin version of myself just doing action scenes and like having D&D fight scenes, and then I imagine like other aspects of myself in certain forms helping me. And then not too long ago, actually, I had this idea of like the D&D characters are also that I've played, the big ones that I've played a lot, they're also in my head, and they would want me to feel better. And now I do this thing where I imagine my old characters helping fight those demons, like that frog character that I was talking about. And not just characters that have died, just like any character I've ever had, and many World Forge characters. And it's this weird way of like, you got to find what works for you. And I wouldn't necessarily at all suggest anybody else do that, but it is, the imagination is so vivid, and I get wrapped up in what my imagination is doing without meaning to. It's more I struggle not to get wrapped up in my imagination. So at some point I just realized I could start tuning my imagination to be this like glorious battle of the evils that are in my head.
Honestly, that's beautiful, Coleman.
Thanks.
That's beautiful, man. I think that's such a wonderful and deeply articulate way of phrasing a lot of the battles with mental health I think a lot of us have. But I think it's an even more amazing way to illustrate how you have used stories as an incredibly healthy coping mechanism, right? As an outlet, as a way to to use the D&D to purge those demons, I think, in some ways, right? Because that battle may go on forever, but it doesn't mean you're not one hell of a powerful AF, to us at this point, like you are,
and you're always
you are
leveling
very
up.
finely human. 100%, and you have this sort of cadre, this camaraderie of characters that you have brought life to, but in some ways they've given you. You know how I phrased it kind of in my head is Thanos' gauntlet.
Yeah.
You know how there's the Infinity Stones? Whenever I finish a campaign, and I think this is what you're saying, just in a slightly different spin, is the best part of the character that I needed to get a lesson from, I get the Infinity Stone of that trait in me for life as a reward for putting my soul into the story. And so that's like another way of thinking about leveling up. So for you, these characters now have like this representation of power and strength, but also of of wisdom, right? Of
Yeah.
experience, and they have
Yeah.
added, I think, tremendous psychological benefit, in your inner psyche. And I think that was just such a wonderful way that you articulated that. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah.
Um,
It's definitely unorthodox and not common, but like I said, you got to find what works for you.
well,
And I
I think
definitely, oh, I would just say I definitely, like, on a note that we might talk about on a whole nother episode, but I definitely, if you were asking me what my aspirations were, I also want to use the World Forge to write a secondary book called Tabletop Therapy, or maybe a better title, but essentially to write a book about tabletop and using tabletop games in a therapeutic way. I mean, just what I've gone
and you
through.
and I have talked about that a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You and I have talked about it a lot. I think if anyone who has, eventually, if you're a new player, the veneer of the character equals you is, or your character, you are like whatever character you've created. In
Yeah.
other words, like that has to become part of you. Like that
Yeah.
veneer of. No, that's someone totally different. That's going to drop over time. You literally can't help but imprint yourself psychologically. Even if you're playing someone drastically different, you have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, like no one is, I think, that skilled to keep them completely separate. So I think to your point, we've talked. I think therapy is by far the most underrated application of this, and it doesn't have to be as sort of liminal or super explicit like it is in a traditional therapy setting, because a lot of this can happen subconsciously at first as you're playing, and then, to use your word, level up into something that's a much more conscious exercise in sort of the healing of what is going on with you inside, right? And I think you did a really good job explaining that. I mean, we could probably sit here and have an entire episode simply about ways it has helped heal our fractured psyches, but I completely agree with you, Coleman. That's it's a noble, I think, goal, and it's definitely one that I unequivocally share too.
Nice. Well, thanks. And I think that, like you said, we've talked about that a lot, and I think that is one of the big connections that you and I had. You and I both see not just the therapy application, but I think you and I both see that this whole idea of just tabletop role playing in general is, we've barely scratched the surface of what this thing that we can do together, the idea of telling a story together, there's endless possibilities of what that could do.
100%. I actually just did I don't know if it's come out yet, but I just did a social media video series on like where I think tabletop is going. And
Oh, I
one
saw that one,
is
yeah.
that word, like part two or whatever, was like we're about to enter like a first renaissance of actual play, because in capitalistic society, when money floods a market, it attracts talent, right? And the more talent that we have, the more innovation, the more you're going to see people really investing. That's going to attract new audiences, because the quality of actual play is going to continue to rise and rise. There'll be more options, more genres, right? It'll be an entirely new, just as well-established storytelling medium as video games, as television, as movies, and as theater. In my personal opinion, that's ultimately where it's going. And we are going to have a lot of tools, I think, at our disposal. Entire companies are going to be founded simply around supporting the art form, right, and making it better. Or even like generative AI tools, I think, is going to be incredible. Like when my kids are half my age, like they're going to have access to things like you and I, would just be dreaming of. So I completely agree that we're in the silent movie era, right? The black and white silent movie era of tabletop role playing. Even though it's been around in the mid late 70s, I think we are still in that era, but we're at an inflection point, right? And I completely agree with you for sure.
We're at a big inflection point. I hope I used that word correctly. I agree. Yeah, I've seen so much change just over the way that I was talking about my friend reacting when I was in high school versus now I tell people like I just met on the street that I've written a game system, and they're like, "Oh, cool, that's pretty cool," and I marvel at how just in that alone, the acceptance, it's really great to see that, because there were no good, not get into a lot of ranting. There were no good reasons why D&D and the idea of all this was ever stigmatized. Especially when you learn the history. You know, you were talking about you're a history. You like a lot of that. Your historical fiction, but I've done a deep dive on like how tabletop kind of got to where it is, and seeing the evolution from like war games to tabletop. It's really interesting. And now to see how, man, there's so many actual play podcasts, and like there's just so many games going, and there's websites like or there's just tools like DriveThruRPG, or like what's the Let's Play dot. There's a website where essentially like you can sign up as a DM, or you can sign up as a player, and you just hook up online and like you pay the GMs. The idea that there's people professionally paid to play D&D. I love that we're getting to that point of that much acceptance.
And I think where we're trending is, if you think about the famous directors in Hollywood, right? You know, Scorsese or Spielberg or any of these folks, right? I think that's what we're going with GMs, because think about like this. Obviously, there's going to be immensely successful actual play, but I think one of the really undersold things that I've written quite a bit about over the years is the applications to other mediums. So, for example, our first professionally produced actual play is called One Giant Leap. One Giant Leap is an incredible story which takes place in 2121. It's through the looking glass science fiction. Plug. But in all seriousness, that story,
go check it out.
Watch it, will be 7 of us playing a really wonderful story over 9 episodes. But if you created a video game off that, if you created a movie, you created an HBO television show off that, right? Because the fundamental core ethos of world building behind that is really good. If you don't mind me saying, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but it just is.
No, plug your stuff. Love your art.
That are out there, like any other folks,
everybody go look at it. Everybody go look at it.
Story. Well, listen, forget mine for a second. Think about the wonderful stories that you have faith in, that you've created, or anyone listening to this that you have faith in that you've created. And if you were to prove sort of the value, the business value of that story, it could be adapted to other things really readily. And that's where I think when you realize that GMs are the new world directors, or a new world director, not necessarily the. I think that has an incredible drawing power for creative talent that our industry really needs. It needs funding, it needs talent, and it needs eyeballs. And I think there's going to be this really great snowball effect you're going to see over the next several years as that happens, for sure.
Oh yeah, I love it. I'm all for it. I would love to see that happen.
Well, Coleman, I think what we can do at the very least is see if we can get some of the tabletop goats to get a look at your system, and then you'll make it happy. You know what it reminds me of?
Or yours, or both.
My dreams are like, let's make these into movies to help people psychologically and get as many people as possible. And I'm like way too lofty. You know Calvin and Hobbes? I'm not sure if you're a Calvin and Hobbes guy, but I remember this Calvin and Hobbes sketch where they're talking about, so, if you could wish for anything in the world, Hobbes, what it would be. He goes, a sandwich. And Calvin's like, a sandwich? You could wish for anything, you get a sandwich? And then the last panel is Hobbes munching on a sandwich, and he goes, I got my wish.
Nice.
I feel like you're the Hobbes and I'm the Calvin in this scenario where I'm wishing for all these like ridiculously lofty things, and like you're just munching out like while Brennan Lee Mulligan is like, yo, Coleman, your system's awesome. It was great meeting you. You know what I mean? It's like gonna be one of those things for sure.
If that happened, then there's no way. I don't think I'd never be the same, obviously. Hey, and while we're at it, everybody, all those people look at your system too, why not? We gotta, both of our systems are very similar, and I truly, whoever, however you get to the table, let's just have them get there.
In the business world, they call it interoperability. There needs to be an interoperability of tabletop systems. As long as you're playing stories, I'm more than happy with that. But Coleman, I just want to say it was a genuine pleasure to have you on. Hopefully this is the first of many, right? And obviously I just want to say thank you very much for being such a swell guy, such a great supporter, and for having the courage to put yourself out there and create a system that is attracting, new people into the art form, and just being for such a great guy, honestly.
Well, thanks. Hey, Ian, you rock, and I love what you're doing too. This has been a blast. You and I have such great conversations about just we're both on a lot of similar wavelengths, and I truly enjoy it. And hopefully I'll be back again sometime. But hopefully you'll hey, Brendan Lee Mulligan, get on this. Matt Mercer, get on this freaking show.
Fellas, come on. Anyone in the industry, love to talk to you about it in all seriousness. But again, thank you, Coleman, and have a wonderful day, all right?
You too, buddy.